Hello and welcome to the banks of beautiful Broad Run here in Prince William County, Virginia. My name is Lance with the Office of Historic Preservation here for the county, and today we're going to talk about a historic site that once was but is no more here along these banks, the Milford Mill. Now, Milford Mill stood for nearly 180 years right off of Route 28 in Manassas, today where the not-so-historic Chick-fil-A stands. Now, Milford was a lot of things. First and foremost, it was a grist mill for grinding wheat into flour. It was also a community gathering point, kind of an unofficial center, if you will, a place to trade, a place to gossip. It was at one time a post office, and it was also a slave auction site. Later on, it became a strategic location during the Civil War for at least one battle that was here. But in its 180 years of history, it saw a lot of different things. Now, how did Milford get its name? Well, this very unremarkable name of Milford has a practical reason for that name. And that reason is, well, anytime you have a mill, it's probably going to have a ford nearby. And a ford is a low spot in a waterway where it's easy to cross. And if you look at the nearby mills of Burwell Mill or Colvin Mill, they too have fords just downstream from the mill. Way back in 1751, this land was granted to a gentleman by the name of Valentine Peyton. He was given over 253 acres in that land grant. He doesn't do anything with it as far as developing a mill. When Valentine Peyton dies in 1751, his lands pass to his son, Henry Peyton. And Henry holds on to the land, and he actually acquires another 26 acres or so right along Broad Run here, which is eventually where the mill is built. We think somewhere around 1779 to 1780. And then in 1781, he dies. Well, he then passes on his land to Timothy. And in fact, his will says that 1/4 of all my holdings shall go to him upon the death of my wife. And so Timothy Peyton inherits this mill, this land, and then eventually, at some point, he decides to get rid of it. Somewhere around 1793 to 94, he sells it to Charles Ewell. Charles Ewell is a very prominent landowner in the eastern end of Prince William County. He lives in a house he lived in a house over there that is today called Bel Air. It was the Bel Air plantation, and if you look further in history, you'll know of a Ewell from the Civil War. That is his grandson. The mill is sold to the Ewells, and the Ewells end up running it for a little while until finally they're also having trouble with it. Ewell sells to the Weir family, and the Weir family is a very prominent, in fact, maybe the most prominent family in Manassas in the 1850s. If y'all are familiar with Liberia Plantation, that is their home. So the Weirs begin operations here, running the mill. And then some time, as the Orange and Alexandria Railroad begins to be built from Alexandria going out to Gordonsville, well, they wanted to petition the railroad to have the post office and the rail moved to where Milford is. And Milford had served as a post office under the Weirs. Weir was actually a postmaster for a while, and he said, you know what? It would do a lot of good for my business if the railroad came this way. But ultimately, the Orange and Alexandria Railroad decided to build about a mile from here, further downriver, at what is today called Bristow Station. While the Weirs owned it, in 1796, there was a advertisement that was placed in Dumfries for a slave auction that was held here. And why is it held here? We're not exactly sure, but this is a small community, and the mill is a gathering place. As mentioned earlier, it's sort of a town center, an unofficial community center, if you will. So if people are used to coming here for getting their post or their mail, and they're coming here for gossip, then it's not a long stretch to do commerce in the form of a slave trade here. Now, that's not the last time that slavery comes into play. Along comes this thing called the Civil War in 1861. Now, the Weir family, being a a prominent Virginia family, being slaveholding and having about 80 to 90 enslaved of their own at their plantation in Manassas, they decided, well, this is a really great time to evacuate. And many in Northern Virginia did. And especially those of wealth and prominence decided, we're not going to risk it with the Union being so close. And so they decided to leave. From what we can tell, the Weirs actually employed millers here and millers' assistants. However, during the Civil War, starting in 1861, they entrusted the mill to an enslaved miller, Cornelius Naylor. Now, the Weirs evacuated the area like a lot of wealthy landowners would have done. They took what they could and they left behind enslaved to take care of their property. In fact, Julia, one of the daughters of the Weir family, she used the mill as a storage locker. Didn't work out so well. The Union came in and took some of her things and redistributed them. But during this time, Cornelius Naylor is still running the mill up until at least March of 1862. In March, the Confederates evacuate the area, and in come the Union just a few days later, and they end up finding the mill. And it's unclear if it's Cornelius or someone else, but an enslaved person says, please do not destroy the mill. We need this for our food supply so that the African-American population in the Manassas area does not starve. Well, they were given guarantees by the U.S. Army that, we're going to leave it alone, probably with the understanding that it was only for their use and not to aid the Confederacy. However, by the end of the Civil War, it was destroyed and it was inoperable. Now, speaking of the Civil War, one of the important things that happens at Milford, it may seem inconsequential in the large scheme of the Civil War, but hey, it's important to local history. And one of the battles that took place here in Prince William County is on the morning of October 14th, 1863, is Confederate General A.P. Hill is standing on what is today what I like to call Harris Teeter Hill. And he looks out over Milford and he sees a bunch of Union soldiers crossing the river at the ford. That's that low point in the river right at Milford, and he sees them kind of lounging on the hillside, taking a break, getting some water. Well, he has been chasing the Union 5th Corps all day, and he's cross county lines to get here, and he says, man, I have finally got a battle in sight, and I want to bring them to battle before they retreat all the way to Centerville for their winter quarters, and that's the end of the fighting season. So what does he do? Without any reconnaissance or cavalry out there being his eyes and ears, he very quickly draws up a few artillery pieces and starts bombarding this bank that we're standing on, and where a bunch of very surprised Union were. And that is the opening shots to the Battle of Bristow Station. Fast forward just a little while later, and it is a very ill-fated battle that lasted 45 minutes, and it was a sound Confederate defeat. And if you want to know more about that, you can check out one of our other videos. Now, to get back to the mill and what happened there, by the end of the war, the mill is destroyed. The Weirs also have their fortunes destroyed because the Weirs, being plantation landowners and slaveholders, their fortunes are forever changed with the ending of the institution of slavery. They can no longer afford the properties that they have and to maintain them, so they are forced to sell. And they end up selling this mill to a man who is originally from New Jersey, and his name is Hornbaker, and he ends up buying the place, and from what we can tell, he fixes it up. And it's not just an easy restoration job of fix a few things. He uses timbers from his own woodlot at a different farm and completely reconstructs the mill. So we could say that it really is the second mill on this site. Now, Hornbaker runs that for quite a long time. And if we were to look at the Ewells and the Weirs as one continuous family of ownership, basically Hornbaker and his offspring run it until the Great Depression. And it passes through a few different hands, and eventually his son-in-law decides is he's had enough of running the mill and he wants to fully invest in real estate right about the time of the Great Depression. And so after that, the mill's fortunes definitely go downhill. So the mill is sold one more time to private sale, and the last owner, he barely holds on to it for about 14 months, and then eventually it is sold to a corporate mill, and that's where things continue to go down. That corporate mill runs it till about 1936, which, if you know your Great Depression history, that is really right in the thick of it, and things have not been going well for a very long time by that point. And so operations ceased to exist sometime right around 1936 here. And it's largely because of the Great Depression and all of its effects. After the son-in-law decides to sell the mill and get into real estate right at the start of the Great Depression, or just before it, things really start to change. And so eventually it is sold to private ownership one more time. And then the Manassas Milling Company decides to pick it up during the Great Depression, right at the start. And this is really where the mill goes into quick decline, because, well, things are okay for the corporate mills at that time. Their fortunes changed just like the family-owned mills did. And so by 1936, things are looking pretty bleak, and eventually the Manassas Milling Company loses it, and it is owned by a bank. And then eventually it goes to one last private ownership, and it's a farmer who buys it. He never really fully restores the mill at all to have it work. In fact, he just lets it become dilapidated. And then by 1960, he starts to use lumber from the mill for a barn that he is building on his farm. So all that remained of the mill was the huge heavy timbers that framed it. And if you talk to old timers around here, they'll tell you, oh yeah, all the way up until about early 1980, you could see it still standing along Route 28 here in Manassas. However, eventually even that came down. Now, to the savvy explorer today, if you do want to take a peek, it once was a great landmark here. While you're visiting Chick-fil-A, you can step off the side of the parking lot, and if you go over the manicured lawn and look out over Broad Run, you will see a few stones in the woods there that outline part of the foundation of the mill, as well as you'll see a little bit of some foundation stones going off towards the bridge to 28, and that was a mill race there. And so that really concludes kind of the 180-year history of what Milford was, what it became, and then how it turned out. And today we have a very different scenery here, but it is still a beautiful place to take in Broad Run. Now, if you like this and you like hearing about history, especially here locally in Northern Virginia and even more specifically Prince William County, feel free to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or look us up at pwchistory.org, and we're happy to talk your ear off about all kinds of fun stuff that happens here. My name is Lance, and thanks for taking the time with us. Y'all have a good one.